Imagine a world where the very air you breathe is trying to kill you. Your crops have turned to ash, your livestock are suffocating in the fields. And now, the one thing you need to survive, fuel, has become more valuable than gold. Across the Great Plains in 1936, cooking wasn't just a chore, it was a life-threatening risk. Fire required wood or coal, and in the middle of a dust storm, finding fuel meant walking into a suffocating void you might never come back from. But the hunger? The hunger didn't care about the storm. So the families of the Dust Bowl did the unthinkable. They stopped cooking. They mastered the art of the no-cook meal, recipes born out of absolute desperation, designed to keep a human body moving when the stove went cold for weeks at a time. Welcome to the Heritage Archive. Today we are uncovering a side of American history that isn't in the textbooks. I've spent weeks digging through first-hand pioneer accounts and WPA narratives to bring you 15 no-cook meals from the Dust Bowl. These aren't recipes in the traditional sense, these are tactical survival maneuvers. From the dough ball that kept children alive to a technique one mother in Kansas called the final answer, a meal that seems impossible until you realize just how close they were to the edge. If you think you're prepared for a real crisis, you need to see how the toughest generation in American history ate when the fuel ran out. To understand these meals, you have to understand the environment. We aren't just talking about camping, we're talking about static electricity so thick it would short out car engines. We're talking about dust pneumonia that filled children's lungs with silt. In that world, lighting a fire inside a house sealed tight with wet rags wasn't just difficult, it was a carbon monoxide death trap. I've cross-referenced these accounts with modern survival science to understand how they stayed upright. What I found was a forgotten mastery of chemical digestion and mechanical satiety. They learned how to trick the human stomach into feeling full using nothing but cold water, raw starch, and pure grit. Pay close attention when we hit meal number 3. It's a dish that defies everything we know about food safety today. But in 1934, it was the only thing standing between a family and a shallow grave in the backyard. It involves a single pantry staple and a cold curing process that takes 12 hours but requires 0 heat. Look, we live in a microwave society. We assume the stove will always turn on. But the Heritage Archive reminds us that comfort is a fragile, thin line. If the grid went down and the gas lines went dry tomorrow, 90% of Americans wouldn't know how to eat. These 15 meals are your insurance policy. They are the proof that the human spirit can thrive on the barest of essentials. Let's start with meal 15, the dough ball, the most basic, brutal unit of survival in the American West. Meal number 15. The raw dough ball. This is as primitive as it gets. When the woodpile was buried under 5 feet of silt and the wind was howling at 60 miles an hour, you didn't bake bread. You made paste. You'd mix raw flour with just enough water to create a thick, gummy ball. It tasted like library glue, and it was incredibly hard to swallow. But in your stomach, that raw starch expanded. It gave you a heavy, physical sensation of being full that lasted for hours. It wasn't about flavor, it was about stopping the cramps long enough to get some sleep. Meal number 14, cold lard shingles. In the 1930s, fat was your armor. If you had a jar of rendered hog fat or lard, you had a fighting chance. My research found accounts of lard sandwiches being the primary school lunch for children in the Panhandle. They'd take a piece of cold, day-old cornbread or even a plain cracker and smear it thick with cold lard. No salt, no sugar, just pure, concentrated calories. It provided the thermal energy their bodies needed to fight off the dust chills that came every night when the sun went down. Meal number 13, vinegar lemonade. Vitamin C was a myth in the Dust Bowl. Scurvy was a very real ghost haunting the plains. Without fresh fruit or heat to cook vegetables, they turned to the acid trick. They'd mix a spoonful of vinegar with water and a tiny bit of precious sugar. They called it lemonade. It was a psychological lie, but the acidity helped clean the palate of the constant taste of dirt and provided just enough of a chemical kick to keep the scurvy at bay. In a grid-down scenario, vinegar is your best friend. Meal number 12, cracker mush. If you were lucky enough to have a box of saltines, you had no-cook cereal. They'd soak the crackers until they lost all texture. In their minds, they were eating cream of wheat. It was soft on the throat, which was usually raw and bleeding from breathing in the dust, and it was easy to digest. It was the ultimate comfort food when comfort was nowhere to be found. Meal number 11, the cold soak bean paste. Now, we all know you can't eat raw beans. They're toxic. But when you have no fire, you have to get creative with time. This is where chemical digestion comes in. By grinding dried beans into a fine powder first, and then soaking that powder in water for 24 hours, they manage to soften the proteins enough to eat without ever lighting a match. But as we move toward the top 10, we're leaving desperation behind and entering ingenuity. Coming up next is a meal that uses a common garden weed and a bottle of something most people today throw away. And then we'll get to meal number 3, the final answer that kept one family in Kansas alive for an entire month without a single spark of fire. Meal number 10, the dust-washed purslane. Most people in 2026 spend a fortune at the hardware store trying to kill this plant in their driveway. In 1934, purslane was a miracle. It's a succulent, which means it stores water in its leaves, a literal lifesaver in a drought. They'd scrub the grit off with a damp rag and eat it raw. It's crunchy, slightly lemony, and it's one of the highest plant-based sources of omega-3 fatty acids on the planet. When the cattle were dying from eating dust, the people were surviving on the weeds the dust couldn't kill.
Meal number 9, brine-soaked oats. This sounds like something out of a nightmare, but it's pure survival chemistry. If you didn't have milk or heat to make oatmeal, you used the acidity soak. They would pour leftover pickle brine or sauerkraut juice over dry oats and let it sit overnight. The acid in the vinegar would pre-digest the grains, softening them until they were edible. It gave you salt for electrolytes and fermented probiotics to keep your gut from shutting down under the stress of the storm. Meal number 8, the shadow cracker. This was a masterclass in psychological warfare against hunger. If a family was lucky enough to have one tin of meat, they had to make it last a week. They would scrape a layer of meat so thin onto a cracker that you could almost see through it. They called it the shadow. By eating it slowly and focusing on the salt, they managed to trick their brains into thinking they'd had a full protein meal. It's a lesson in mind over belly that we've completely forgotten in our age of excess. Meal number 7. Stone-ground nut butter. Peanut butter, as we know it, was a luxury, but raw peanuts were often distributed as relief supplies. Without a grinder or electricity, they used the old way, 2 flat stones. They'd grind the nuts into a gritty paste and eat it straight off the rock. It was high-density fat and protein that didn't require a single spark of fire. To this day, a jar of peanut butter is still the gold standard for any no-cook emergency kit. Meal number 6, the white velvet spoonful. If you had a can of sweetened condensed milk, you had a no-cook dessert that doubled as a high-calorie survival ration. 1 spoonful was enough to give a child the sugar rush needed to stop the lethargy of malnutrition. But we're moving into the top 5 now. This is where we see the final answer I promised you. Coming up next is a meal that uses a byproduct of the dairy industry that most people today find gross. But in 1935, it was the only thing that kept the dust orphans of the Great Plains from fading away. And then we'll look at the meal that required 0 fire, but used the heat of the sun in a way that will change how you look at your backyard forever. Meal number 5. Clabbered milk and silt. This is a tough one for the modern stomach to wrap its head around. Before refrigeration, if milk went sour, you didn't throw it out. That was a calorie-rich sin. You let it clabber or thicken into a yogurt-like curd. During the Dust Bowl, this was often the only protein available. The silt wasn't an ingredient, it was an inevitability. They'd eat the sour curds while the dust settled on the bowl, adding a gritty crunch to every bite. It provided the probiotics to keep their immune systems from collapsing in an era where a simple infection could be a death sentence.
Meal number 4. The soul-cured fruit leather. When the fuel ran out, the sun became the stove. They would take any scraps of fruit, even the peelings, and lay them on the tin roofs of their shacks. The blistering 110-degree Oklahoma sun would flash dry them in hours. No fire needed. They'd chew on these leathery strips for hours. The natural sugars gave them a quick energy spike, and the act of chewing helped produce saliva to clear the dust out of their throats. Meal number 3. The final answer. I promised you this one. This was the meal that kept a family in Kansas alive for 30 days without a single spark. It's cold-soaked cornmeal. But there's a trick. Raw cornmeal is almost impossible for the human body to process without cooking, unless you use the fermentation hack. They would mix the cornmeal with water and a tiny bit of salt, then let it sit in a sealed jar for 48 hours. The natural yeasts in the air would begin to sour the corn, breaking down the tough starches and making the nutrients bioavailable. It tasted like sour mash, but it was a complete, pre-digested meal that required 0 wood, 0 coal, and 0 fire. Meal number 2. Raw salt pork carpaccio. We call it charcuterie today and pay $40 for it. In 1935, they called it the only way. Because salt pork was cured in a heavy brine, it was technically safe to eat raw if it was handled right. They would shave it into strips so thin they'd melt on the tongue. It was pure, raw energy. One strip was enough to give a man the strength to keep shoveling the dust away from his front door for another hour. Meal number 1. The everything cold pot. This is the culmination of every trick we've discussed. It was the perpetual stew for a world without fire. They would take every no-cook scrap, the dough balls, the soaked grains, the fat drippings, and combine them in one ceramic crock. It was a testament to the fact that when you have nothing left, no fuel, no water, no hope, you still have the human mind. And that mind can turn a handful of dust and a jar of cold water into a future for your children. We look at these 15 meals and we see hardship, we see deprivation. But if you look closer, through the eyes of the people who actually lived it, you see something else. You see a refusal to surrender. In 1935, when the fuel ran out and the sky turned black, these no-cook meals weren't just calories, they were an act of defiance. Every dough ball swallowed and every shadow of meat shared was a way of telling the storm, "Not today, you haven't broken us yet." In our modern 2026 world, we've traded that resilience for convenience. We've forgotten that our stoves, our heaters, and our microwaves are privileges, not rights. The Heritage Archive exists because the greatest generation left us a map, a blueprint for how to hold our ground when the luxuries of the world are stripped away. They proved that a human being doesn't need a fire to keep the flame of hope alive. If the grid went dark tomorrow, if the gas lines went dry and the fuel became gold once again, how would you feed your family? Would you be a victim of the circumstances or a master of the no-cook kitchen? The skills we discussed today are more than just history. They are your insurance policy for an uncertain future. If you believe that the grit of our ancestors is the ultimate tool for our survival, then join us. Hit that subscribe button and become a part of the Heritage Archive. We are documenting the lost wisdom of the past so we can face the future with our heads held high. Drop a comment below with the word dust if you're ready to reclaim these survival skills. Tell me which of these fireless meals surprised you the most, or share a story from your own family's history. I read every single one of them. Thanks for standing in the storm with me. I'll see you in the next chapter.